What the narcissist did to you trashed their whole future. Let's talk about something real today. Let's talk about betrayal, manipulation, and the kind of pain that doesn't just bruise you, it breaks you wide open. Because when you love a narcissist, when you trust a narcissist, and when you give them the best of who you are and they weaponize it, that is a trauma so deep you don't even recognize yourself afterward. But here's the truth. You've probably never heard what they did to you. That didn't ruin your life. It trashed their future. They threw away the one person who genuinely saw them, believed in them, and stood by them. They thought they could play games forever, but now you're not playing anymore. And trust me, that one decision, that one manipulation too far was their collapse in slow motion. They lost the only person who genuinely cared. Narcissists walk through life believing everyone is replaceable. That's their first fatal mistake. They underestimate the value of someone who shows up with a real heart, real loyalty, and real love. They confuse empathy with weakness. They confuse patience with stupidity, and they mistake silence for submission. But when you finally walk away, that's when they realize they didn't just lose someone, they lost the someone. You weren't in their life because you needed validation. You weren't looking to use them, manipulate them, or play games. You were there because you saw potential. You believed in their ability to be better. You offered unconditional care in a world where everyone else had conditions. And that care, which was gold, they treated like garbage. You gave them room to grow. You gave them the benefit of the doubt over and over again. You forgave lies, tolerated mood swings, absorbed blame, and kept showing up with open arms. Not because you lacked self-respect, but because you believed that love could win. You were willing to fight for the connection, but they never fought for you. They thought your heart had no limits. They thought you'd stay no matter how deep the wounds cut. They thought they owned your loyalty forever. But the truth about people who genuinely care is this. When they're done, they are done for good. And when you walked, it wasn't impulsive. It was years in the making. Narcissists don't mourn people. They mourn the supply. They miss what you did for them, how you made them feel, how you centered their world. But in your case, it goes deeper because what you brought wasn't just attention or admiration. You brought understanding, safety, compassion, and those things are rare. They threw away someone who actually understood their darkness and still chose to love them. Someone who didn't flinch at the broken parts. Someone who stayed through the chaos. And that kind of love doesn't come around twice. So while they might post like everything's great, trust this. They know deep down they lost a once-in-a-lifetime person. You saw them, the real them, behind the mask, behind the charm, behind the cold detachment. You saw the insecure, wounded, terrified child inside and chose to love that version too. Not because it was your job, but because your empathy is your superpower, and they mistook that power for a weakness they could exploit. There's a reason they keep trying to peek back into your life. A reason they stalk your energy. A reason they still bring you up in conversations. Because they know they blew it. They'll never say it. They'll never admit it. But that moment you stopped answering, stopped reacting, stopped caring, that was the moment they realized they burned the bridge to the only place they ever felt truly accepted. You weren't just another person passing through their life. You were the foundation. You were the home. You were the calm inside the storm. And when you left, they didn't just lose a relationship, they lost emotional shelter. The kind that can't be rebuilt with someone new, because it wasn't the connection that made it special, it was you. They will try to convince themselves that you were the problem. They'll twist the story, paint themselves as the victim. That's what they do. Rewrite reality so they don't have to face accountability. But no matter what narrative they push, they can't escape one truth. They will never find another you, and they know it. Every time they get close to someone new, they'll compare. They'll crave that depth again, that emotional intelligence, that unwavering presence. But it won't be there because those things don't come from pretending. They come from healing, and they never did the work. You were the only person who saw their pain and didn't run. You held space. You showed grace. You gave them a chance to rise, and they chose to destroy the very thing that could have redeemed them. That's not your failure. That's their self-destruction in motion. You didn't lose them. They lost you. And that loss is the kind of pain that doesn't hit all at once. It comes in waves, quiet, heavy, relentless. It creeps into the empty spaces of their life and reminds them you're not coming back. They thought your love was infinite. They thought your care was unshakable. They thought no matter what they did, you'd still be there. But you're not. And they know that no matter who they meet or how they spin the story, they had something real, and they wrecked it. And that wreckage is the foundation of the future they now have to live in. One without your light, one without your love, one without the person who genuinely cared. They gambled with your heart and bet against their own growth. They knew exactly what you brought to the table, and they still chose to flip it over. That's the gamble they made. You were all in. They were playing games. And the crazy part is, they thought they'd win. They thought they could test your love, sabotage your peace, manipulate your mind, and still keep you hooked. That's how delusional the ego becomes when someone's living in a fantasy they created to avoid healing. You offered consistency, they offered chaos. You were ready for real intimacy, they were addicted to control. And every time they chose pride over progress, silence over communication, blame over accountability, they weren't just pushing you away, they were pushing themselves further from the person they were meant to become. They bet that your empathy would keep you captive. They bet that your fear of being alone would outweigh your need for respect. They bet that the love you gave so freely would be enough to make you tolerate disrespect. But they were wrong. They weren't just gambling with your heart. They were betting against their own future. And now they're living the consequences. Every time they invalidated your feelings, they killed a piece of connection. Every time they made you second-guess your worth, they taught you how to detach. Every time they shut you down instead of hearing you out, they built the wall you eventually walked away from. They thought they were gaining power, but they were losing access. Slowly, silently, completely. People like this don't see how valuable your love is until it's gone. Not because they're blind, but because they're scared to grow, scared to face the mirror, scared to admit that the person trying to love them wasn't the enemy their own ego made them believe. But instead of choosing courage, they chose control. And control always backfires. You weren't there to fix them. You were there to love them, but they made your love a battlefield. They took your compassion and made it a transaction. They took your honesty and turned it into a threat. And now they're left with the truth. Every choice they made was a brick in the wall that cost them everything. It wasn't that they didn't know how to love. It's that they refused to learn. Love requires accountability, growth, humility, vulnerability, and those things require work. But the narcissist doesn't want work. They want worship. They want you to shrink so they can feel bigger. They want you to take the fall so they can feel blameless. And in doing that, they traded depth for dominance. They had the opportunity to grow alongside you. They had the space to learn, evolve, and build something solid. But growth feels like weakness to someone who's never looked in the mirror and taken responsibility. So instead of rising with you, they dragged you down. Not because you weren't enough, but because they weren't ready to rise. You begged them to hear you. You pleaded for clarity, honesty, healing. You gave them the blueprint. All they had to do was meet you halfway. But they kept choosing ego. They kept choosing distance. They kept choosing the temporary high of control over the permanent strength of real connection. And now they have to sit in that. The hard truth is this. When someone gambles with your heart, they're also gambling with their access to real intimacy, real healing, and real joy, because love like yours isn't something they'll find again by accident. It's not mass-produced, it's not swipeable, it's rare, and they bet it all against that rarity. You were the lesson they weren't willing to learn, the wake-up call they refused to answer, the mirror they kept trying to smash instead of looking into, and now they're stuck in a cycle of emptiness they created, not because you failed them, but because they failed to grow. They underestimated you because they assumed your silence was weakness. They assumed your forgiveness was approval. But what they didn't realize is that every time they pushed you away, they were pushing themselves toward a future of regret. Because growth doesn't happen in comfort, and they chose comfort at the cost of connection. You didn't just survive their manipulation. You outgrew it. You transcended it. You woke up, and the moment you did, the game was over. Not just for them, for the version of them that could have grown but didn't. That version had a chance, and they threw it away. The moment they decided control mattered more than connection, they gambled with your heart. and they lost access to the only person who would have stood by them through every stage of growth. They burned the bridge built with real care. They bet against love, against healing, and against you, and in doing that, they bet against their own transformation. Your healing became their worst nightmare. They never expected you to rise. They never expected you to wake up, rebuild, and glow from the very wreckage they caused. They expected you to stay broken. They counted on your confusion. They thrived on your emotional exhaustion. Because as long as you were hurting, they felt powerful. As long as you were trying to fix what they kept breaking, they felt in control. But something shifted. Maybe slowly, maybe all at once. You stopped asking what was wrong with you. You started asking what was wrong with them. That's when the fear hit them. Not because you were gone, but because they saw you healing in a way they could never manipulate again. They watched the fog clear and their illusion shattered. Healing is terrifying to a narcissist. It means they can no longer access the parts of you they once used as tools. Your guilt, your empathy, your fear of abandonment. When those stop working, they have no playbook left. That's what makes your healing their nightmare. It exposes just how weak they really are without your emotional reactions feeding their false power. You stopped needing their validation. You stopped explaining yourself. You stopped overcompensating. That silence, that peace, wasn't passive. It was the loudest message you've ever sent. And they heard it. They just pretended not to because pretending is the only thing they've mastered. They never expected you to choose yourself. They expected you to keep circling their drama like a storm you thought you could fix. But healing forced you to step out of the chaos and look at the damage objectively. You didn't just patch the wounds. You started asking why you allowed them in the first place. That level of self-awareness threatened everything they built on your self-doubt. They depended on your emotional reactions to stay relevant in your life. The fights, the confusion, the constant push and pull. Those weren't accidents. That was control in disguise. But healing teaches you to stop participating. And when you stop playing, they lose the illusion of power they thought they had over you. You started setting boundaries, saying no, creating distance. They didn't see that as growth. They saw it as betrayal. Because in their world, love means submission. Attention means control. They can't process your healing as strength. So they label it as coldness, cruelty, abandonment. But deep down, they know the truth. You're finally healthy. Your glow bothers them. Your peace irritates them. Your clarity threatens them. Because you're not just moving on, you're evolving. You're becoming someone who no longer tolerates abuse disguised as love. And every day you rise, you remind them of everything they're not willing to face within themselves. They thought they broke you permanently. They didn't see that breaking. You cracked open the door to your power. You stepped through it. They stayed behind, stuck in a version of themselves that can't survive without attention, control, or chaos. And the more you heal, the smaller they feel. Healing isn't pretty. It's not about spa days and affirmations. It's crying alone at night and still choosing to get up the next morning without reaching out to them. It's sitting with the ache and choosing not to numb it by going back. It's reprogramming your nervous system to stop mistaking anxiety for love. That kind of healing rewrites your identity, and they hate it because they can't follow you there. Healing exposes them. Your growth is a mirror they can't look into. Every boundary you set, every standard you raise, every moment you choose peace screams one truth louder than anything else. You don't need them anymore. They lost their grip. And now they're scrambling, not because they want to grow, not because they want to change, but because your healing cut off their emotional supply. They can't feed on your pain anymore, and they're left with their own emptiness, the same emptiness they projected onto you for so long. Your healing is your revolution. It's the moment everything turned in your favor, and the more distance you create, the clearer it becomes. They didn't destroy you. They revealed the strength that was always buried underneath the damage, and now they have to live with the reality that your pain made you powerful. They watched you go from confused to conscious, from desperate to grounded, from trauma-bonded to free. That transition didn't just change your life, it exposed their limitations. Because while you're outgrowing the cycle, they're still repeating it with someone else, hoping to recreate the high they once got from controlling you. They can't because you were never just another person. You were their mirror, their anchor, their wake-up call, and they didn't answer it. So now they're haunted by your healing, the one thing they thought would never happen and the one thing they can never undo. You took back the power they never deserved. They got comfortable with your silence, your sacrifices, your forgiveness. They got used to having access to your energy without earning your respect. To them, your patience wasn't strength. It was submission. They misread your kindness as naivety. But the day you woke up and said enough, the ground shifted beneath them. That was the moment you took back what was always yours. Your power. And here's the truth they never saw coming. Your power wasn't something they stole. It was something you handed over piece by piece because you believed they'd treat it with care. That belief was your only mistake. You didn't lose your strength. It was just buried under emotional exhaustion, manipulation, and constant survival mode. And when you finally came up for air, they couldn't recognize you anymore. You stopped reacting to their provocations. You stopped explaining yourself. You stopped dancing around their moods just to keep peace that never really existed. And when you stopped playing their game, they panicked because their power didn't come from who they were. It came from who you allowed yourself to become around them. You weren't weak. You were surviving. You weren't clueless. You were loyal. You weren't stuck. You were slowly waking up. And when that awakening finally happened, you didn't scream. You didn't make a dramatic exit. You didn't beg them to understand. You just detached quietly, permanently. That was your power in motion. They tried to make you believe you were crazy, overly emotional, overreacting, and maybe for a while you believed them. But gaslighting only works when you doubt your own instincts. And the moment you stopped questioning yourself, the spell broke. You saw the manipulation for what it was, and they could feel that shift, even if they never acknowledged it out loud. Taking back your power didn't look like revenge. It looked like clarity, like walking away without justifying it, like blocking without guilt, like choosing peace over closure, like realizing that someone else's chaos isn't your responsibility to fix. You stopped being the emotional dumping ground for a person who weaponized your empathy. And that's when your life started again. They were addicted to your reactions, your tears, your frustration, your confusion. It fed their illusion of control. But healing taught you how to stop reacting, how to sit in your silence and protect your energy. And when you stopped reacting, they started unraveling because your reaction was their anchor. Now they're drifting in their own dysfunction and you're grounded in truth. They were never in control. They were just louder, more demanding, more manipulative. But true control, the kind that comes from self-mastery, was always yours. And once you stopped abandoning yourself for their comfort, they had nothing left to work with. That scared them because the new version of you doesn't flinch, doesn't chase, doesn't break. You didn't just take your power back. You stopped giving it away. You stopped explaining your worth. You stopped allowing chaos to define your normal. You didn't need to change them. You needed to reclaim you, and that's exactly what you did. Quietly, relentlessly, beautifully. And they're still trying to figure out what happened. They're still trying to bait you back into the old patterns, hoping you'll fall for the same guilt traps. But that version of you doesn't exist anymore. You outgrew the cycle. You outgrew the role they put you in. You outgrew the lie that said, love has to hurt to be real. They were never ready for someone with your kind of heart, your kind of loyalty, your kind of power, and now they have to live with the fact that they lost something they never deserved. Not because you changed, but because you finally remembered who you were. You didn't just walk away. You reclaimed your life. You stopped bleeding for someone who kept handing you the knife. And now they have to live with the reality that the version of you they controlled is gone. You're not cold. You're not cruel. You're clear. You finally know your worth, and that's a power they'll never understand because they never earned it. And now they'll never get it.